We have a really special treat today. And I thank all of our students in advance for their full and undivided attention for today's important conversation. I want to give you a little bit more context. I know you've spoken about this in some of your classes, but I want to give you a little context about what we're doing here today, so that it helps as you're listening to some of the questions that are being asked, and hopefully prompt some additional questions for you as well. We have some very special guests. I'm going to allow others to introduce themselves as well, but to my right here is Attorney General Gurbir Grewal. He's our Attorney General here in the state of New Jersey, which means he's the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for our state. Sometimes people need a little bit more explanation about what the AG does, and fortunately he will be here. He's the best source for that information to be able to share that with you. He has served both as a prosecutor in Bergen County, appointed to that position by then Governor Christie a few years back, and was appointed by current Governor Phil Murphy to the position of Attorney General that he has held since January of 2018. We were presented over this past week with the opportunity to have General Grewal here with us. And when given that chance, regardless of any of the situations happening in our world today, we jumped at it, because to be able to speak to a person like this and hear directly from him about the work he is doing to protect our rights here in the state is of vital importance. Of course, it is no secret that our Jewish community has faced a rise in anti-Semitic acts and hate crimes over these past number of years. We spoke earlier this week in different settings about the horrific tragedy that occurred last week in Jersey City, one that General Grewal found himself, of course, right in the center of, speaking out as he always has throughout his career against hate speech whenever and wherever it arises. It is my hope that you're going to take a lot out of this conversation today. That overall message of the need for us to be kind to one another, to recognize hate speech when it comes out and to call it what it is, and to make sure people know that is unacceptable. It is important that you listen to this message today to learn more about him and the work he is doing, as I know it will inform your own thinking in your own lives. Today's conversation is one where you're going to learn more about the position and the work and the realities of our world today. And it is my great honor and privilege to be able to welcome our Attorney General for this. So you understand the format, and so you will not see me standing up here again. The Attorney General is going to speak for a bit just to introduce himself, and we have asked all of you to participate by submitting some questions for a conversation, and all of our students in this room should be very grateful to seniors Eva Hale and Ben Hirsch who have worked with Mr. Ober to prepare the questions. The questions that you hear today are your questions coming from you to the General, and we will have time for that throughout this period. So without further ado, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Everyone can hear me okay? Right? Well, let me just introduce the folks who are here with me this morning, and then what I want to do is tell you a little bit about myself, about the work I do, about why I do that work, and then talk about what happened last week in Jersey City and to answer some of your questions. I am the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the state of New Jersey, for a state of 9 million residents. And that entails a lot, but it all comes down, I think, to public safety and to standing up for all of our residents in this state. I can't do that work alone. I have a lot of great partners in these efforts. I have a lot of great team members, and I want to introduce a couple of them who are here this morning. With me is the Deputy Superintendent of the New Jersey State Police. That's Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Noble. We have about 2,700 road troopers in New Jersey. There are 2,700 troopers total in New Jersey, but you must know the road troopers. They're the ones in the white cars with that beautiful emblem on it that when your parents are zipping down the highway and they slow down, it's because they see that symbol and it knows, they know to slow down a little bit. But just a terrific organization and a terrific partner in our efforts to promote public safety. To Jeff's left is Drew Campy. He's the Deputy Director of our New Jersey Office of Homeland Security. And they do incredible work throughout the state to make sure we're on top of what's happening in this state, around the country and nationally, to see what the trends are and to make sure we're prepared, and we're preparing all of our institutions and our houses of worship and our schools have the resources they need to be prepared. Because I think that's a key. We have to be prepared in the world we live in now. And another great partner of mine, she was with me, is Rachel Wainer After. There she is. A complete rock star. She's the director of our Division on Civil Rights. She's really, really smart. She went to some really, really great schools. She clerked on the Supreme Court for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And what she does in her role is to stand up for all of you. She stands up for the rights of every resident in this state. And what I'm most proud of is that she led the effort in this state when New Jersey went down to Texas and fought back efforts to repeal the DACA program. She stood up for the 18,000 Dreamers that call New Jersey home and the 800,000 that call this country their home. And so she's an incredible person. So, a little bit about the office. The Attorney General is responsible, like I said, for law enforcement operations in this state. So I have supervisory authority over about 36,000 plus cops in this state, which means I have to set policies and priorities and really set the tone and direction of where we're going as a state when it comes to law enforcement operations and training and practices and priorities. It's a huge part of what we do at the office. But another part of it is really going to court. It's standing up for the rights of our residents and using the tools that we have to bring cases that are important to the interests of the state and to each of you. That's what we call affirmative litigation. And so that's a core priority of ours at the office. Another core priority is making sure that we're dealing with violence in this state, whether it's gun violence or gang violence. We want to use all the tools that we have at the office to make sure we're addressing that super important issue. A third priority for us right now is the opioid epidemic, which is affecting far too many communities, including here in Essex County, but really every corner of the state. And so we're doing everything we can to make sure those who are suffering from addiction get the help that they need, that we are able to get them out of the criminal justice system but into the treatment system. And another core priority, really the fourth pillar of what we're doing at the office, is to improve relationships between law enforcement and community. So we have better understanding of each other and our respective roles, and that we can talk to each other. And when we have those types of conversations, I think that helps public safety, when there's that trust between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. So if I had to say what the four core priorities are for me, those are them. Now let me tell you about how I got here. Because when I was your age, I never ever thought it was possible for somebody who looked like me to be in the position that I hold today, to be responsible for an organization as big as the one I have right now. 8,000 people, 13 departments, oversight over the cops. I just didn't think it was possible. You know, my family came to this country as immigrants looking for a better life. When I was growing up, they were drilling into me that you had no option but to become a doctor. Obviously that didn't happen. I did marry a doctor, so my parents weren't too disappointed. But, you know, that wasn't me. When I was a young kid, your age, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be an English major. I wanted to write the next great novel, right? And so I thought it would be so cool if I went to the smallest school I could find, in the most isolated place I could find, and just go there and work on being a writer. And so I attended a school called Bates College for a year in Lewiston, Maine. The problem was that I had never visited Maine in the winter. I had only gone up there in the spring. And New England is great in the spring, and Maine's great in the spring, but when winter comes, it's really darn cold. And so as I was sitting there in my first winter at Bates College, I realized that I wasn't a great writer, that I didn't really like Maine that much, and that I had an interest for international relations and foreign policy and politics. And I had a roommate who had a whole bunch of transfer applications, and he had one for Georgetown. And I started looking at it and started reading about the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, where you could go and be a diplomat, and you could travel the world, and you could live in really exotic places. I thought that was pretty cool. And so I asked my roommate if he was going to use this transfer application. He said no, he wasn't. And so I applied to Georgetown, and I got in. And so I went down to DC and took all these classes, gearing up to take what's called the Foreign Service exam, to become a Foreign Service officer. And right before graduation, the State Department said, you know what, we have enough Foreign Service officers. We're not going to offer the exam for a while, and so thank you very much. And so I had to pivot. I had to think about, well, what am I going to do now? You know, here I was, a failed English writer, failed English major, can't do the Foreign Service exam. So I came back to Jersey, and I started thinking about things to do. And I was watching Law and Order. Have you guys ever watched that? It's like on all the time, right? You're home. I'm like, this Jack McCoy guy, he's pretty cool. And so I decided I'd go to law school. And I went down to William & Mary School of Law in Virginia, graduated. And I don't think I like Jack McCoy because he was a prosecutor. I think I like Jack McCoy because he just got to argue and do really cool things. And I went to a big law firm. And I was pretty happy there. You know, had a nice career, had a nice car, had a nice condo, and I was really enjoying my life. And I don't think I would have left that life but for September 11th. And all of you are really of a generation that didn't know September 11th. But on that Tuesday morning, my life changed. And the lives of so many other people in this country and this world changed. When tragedy came to the shores of our country. And on that Tuesday morning, I was driving into work in Washington, D.C., and as I was coming over the 14th Street Bridge, I began to hear the news of what was happening. And I went to the lounge, the attorney lounge in my law office there, and we all huddled together and we started to watch what was happening. And in the hours afterwards, as we were processing what was happening, as we were trying to make sense of what happened that day, all of us, I saw, were just united in this anger and in this grief in that moment. And then there was this surge of patriotism that we all started to feel, right? And you know, we're sort of coming together. And it's a patriotism that I felt, my family felt as deeply as our neighbors at the time. But then there was a darker side. And that darker side, in the wake of that tragedy, for me, was the backlash. Because in that moment, there were people who started to target people who didn't look like them, who looked different, who believed differently, who they thought looked like the people responsible for those horrific acts. And it started out subtly. You know, when I was walking to work one day, in the days after, somebody would call me a terrorist. Somebody would tell me to go back home. They didn't mean to come back to Jersey. They would call me Osama bin Laden. And then 4 days after September 11th, all the way down in Arizona, there was somebody who looked like him, practiced the same religion as him. And he was working outside of his business. He was just planting flowers, trying to improve his business. And a guy named Frank Roque drove to where he was and killed him, shot him. Why? Because he wanted to kill towelheads who he thought were responsible for September 11th. It didn't matter that victim, Gurbir Singh Sodhi, practiced a different faith than those people responsible. It didn't matter that he had nothing to do. Just because he looked different and he believed something different, he wanted to kill him. He had that hate in him. And then 2 days later, President Bush went to a mosque in Washington, D.C. And he tried to calm things down because this was really, really boiling up. And he talked about the need to accept all faiths, to accept people who practice Islam, to accept people who practice different religions, to come together as Americans and push back against this rising tide of hate and intolerance we were seeing at the time. But not everybody was so understanding. You know, I continue to experience these small indignities, and they paled in comparison to the suffering that others were experiencing, but they were still really there, and they were percolating, and they were affecting so many people. In that moment, I had to make a choice, I think. What was I going to do? What was I going to do to push back against this hate and this intolerance? And it was in that moment that I said I wanted to do something where I could go out there and really promote understanding through my work. And so I decided to try to become a federal prosecutor. Because, you know, I wanted to be able to get up in front of people and work with agents like Drew Campy, who was an FBI agent before this role, and to show them that you didn't have to look a certain way, you didn't have to believe a certain way to be part and parcel of the fabric of this country. And so I became a federal prosecutor in Brooklyn, and I had the opportunity to get up in front of judges and juries, looking the way I do, believing the way I do, and say, "Good morning, Your Honor, my name is Gurbir Grewal, and I represent the United States in this case." And I thought by changing the perceptions of 12 jurors and others that I could promote understanding. And that's what I did. It was the greatest job in the world. And I continued that here in New Jersey as a federal prosecutor here. And then one day, I got a call from Governor Christie's office talking to me about my interest in becoming the Bergen County prosecutor. And I had spent my entire career in the federal system. So I did what you guys do. I went to Google to see what the Bergen County prosecutor is. And I said, well, this would be really cool. I could promote the same type of understanding through my work with a little bit more of a platform, and I could touch people in my own community, and I could improve the community in which I live. And I did it for 2 years. It was the greatest job ever. And then flash forward to November of 2017. Bless you. I was down at Disney World with my family, and my kids are in public school, so they get that week off when there's a teachers conference. And they have what they call the Jersey Week at Disney. and so I'm down there, and I've got 3 girls, now 11, 9, and 6. But I'm with the then 4-year-old who didn't, the older 2 didn't want her around, so I'm stuck with her, and I have her on the fast pass to get a picture with Ariel, the Little Mermaid. And so we're waiting in line, and I get a call out of the blue. Didn't expect it at all. And it was from Governor-elect Murphy's office saying, "Hey, prosecutor, are you interested in becoming the Attorney General?" And I said, "Of the United States?" And they said, "No, Sessions already has that job now, but of New Jersey." And I said, "Yeah, I think that would be something I'd be interested in." I pulled my daughter from the line, and she's climbing on a fake rock, and I'm just afraid she's going to hurt herself on this call. And I take that call, and it started a process that led me to my position today. And when that opportunity presented, it was a continuation of being able to promote understanding and acceptance through my work, to stand up for people. To stand up for people who face the same type of indignities that I face. And so that's what we've been trying to do at the Attorney General's office through our work. Whether it's our civil work, our criminal work, promoting understanding between law enforcement and community, that's what we're trying to do. That's also a through line through everything that we do at the office. Whether it's standing up for our dreamers, whether it's our Division on Civil Rights holding youth bias task force meetings to hear about what's going on in the schools, whether that's speaking out against anti-Semitism when a school board member says something, or when it's an elected official using this type of language. That's what motivates us. It motivates all of us on the team that we've assembled. And so when an event like last week's happens in Jersey City, we have to deal as prosecutors and investigators with the immediate criminal investigation, which we are doing. But we then have to start to unpack what led to it. Why did people have these hateful ideologies? Why did they target law enforcement and the Jewish community? Why did they do this? Where could we have done better? Where could we have interceded earlier? And that's why we're having listening sessions over the last week with different communities. We were in Ocean County yesterday. We sat with students earlier this week at Solomon Schechter in Bergen County. we've been trying to hear from people on how we could do more and better. And the common theme that I hear, is that we've got to teach kindness to our young people. Because by the time that folks are older and they're already engaging in this type of conduct, it's hard. It's hard to change people at that point. We could hold them accountable criminally. We could use all those tools that we have to really bring the hammer down on them. But that's too late. What we have to do, I think, who knows what apartheid was? Go ahead.
In South Africa, I believe, where the races were separated.
The races were separated, but it was institutionalized segregation, right? And it was just deep-seated. And Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in jail in South Africa. He was fighting apartheid his whole life. And when he was released in 1990, he tried to help that country become better and improve and leave those vestiges of apartheid in the past and have reconciliation and understanding. He became the president, I believe, in 1994. And he served as a president for a number of years, but he's got a very powerful statement that stays with me, and I think is the key to how we fix all of this. Mandela said, he wrote an autobiography called A Long Walk to Freedom, and in it he says that no one is born hating another person. No one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin, their religion, or their background. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. Because love comes much more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. And I think that's where it starts. To get to young people, to teach them love so they don't have room for hate in their hearts. You know, I met with a widow of one of the victims from Jersey City last week, Douglas Miguel Rodriguez, and within the first minute of me sitting down with his wife, I couldn't even get out a word to console her. She just said through her translator, "I've already forgiven the two killers, the people who killed my husband. I've already forgiven them. Because I don't want any hate in my heart. I want to fill my heart with love so I can love the memory of my husband." And then she asked me, she said, "How could anyone hate the Jewish people? How come they had so much hate in their heart, the two killers?" I didn't have words. The type of grace she showed that moment, and what a profound question. And then we started to talk, and she told me more. She said, "We came here 4 years ago with nothing, and the Jewish community gave us everything. We were refugees to this country, leaving everything and everyone we knew behind to come here for opportunity. And we came with nothing, and a landlord took a chance on us. We didn't have money for a security deposit. She let us in. But it was the Jewish community that allowed my husband to work while I could stay home with our daughter and make sure she had a better opportunity here. How could anyone hate people who showed so much compassion and love for my family when we were essentially refugees to this country?" And she said, "That's what you have to fix. You've got to address the guns, you've got to address the crime, you've got to address the hate that people have in their hearts." Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. And I think you guys are our best hope here. That you are going to be the ones that change this. We're going to try our hardest to fix the curricula in our schools, to make sure we're teaching how to be human as much as we're teaching history and English and other topics. But it's going to start with our young people who are going to change the conversation and change the way we interact with each other. So that gives me a little bit of hope, I think. A little bit of hope. And I think, you know, I have to have that hope. You know, one of the other sort of indelible memories from the events in Jersey City is really from Monday. You know, Monday, I went to the scene, as we call it when we do investigations. And I was there with the colonel of the state police. And we were just walking, and we were trying to process everything that had happened. And as we were doing that, we looked above and to the left of the supermarket where these horrible tragedies happened. And we saw 3 or 4 just young boys wearing yarmulkes, waving and laughing and smiling at us. And so I said to the colonel, Pat Callahan, not Noble, let's go there. And so we just peeled off, got in, knocked on the door, he came, let us in, and we met Rabbi Roth, who ran that school. And we went upstairs and just asked him, how's everybody doing? He says, you're less than a week after this horrible tragedy, and he was just smiling. He said it was hard. We were here for 3 or 4 hours on the lockdown while there was gunshots everywhere. And all these kids were just, they were hurting. But when we saw the kids and we talked to them, they just got up unprompted and started clapping. And they weren't clapping for me, they were clapping for the uniform that he wore. And they were smiling. And they were just so thankful that law enforcement was there to protect them in that moment. And all of them are really miracles in this moment. And they're the reason why we need to continue pushing forward. They're the reason why we're here. Because you have to know that we are doing everything we can to protect everyone in this state, all 9 million of our residents, but in particular, any community that feels fear. And so we are the state police, Homeland Security, civil rights. We're here shoulder to shoulder with each other and with each of you to make sure that you don't feel any fear in practicing your faith and coming to school and doing anything or living your lives. And I think my life story should show you that there's no, your faith is not an obstacle to your success, that where you come from is not an obstacle to your success, that what you look like is not an obstacle to your success, and that there are so many good people in this world who are going to do everything they can to see that you thrive and live your lives to your fullest. So with that, I don't know what the next part of the program is, but I'd love to turn it to questions, and we'll all answer your questions. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, General Grewal. That was powerful and provided us with some, I think, deep thoughts to be with us. Ben and Eva have combed through the questions from our student body, and I think they do have some questions they'd like to ask.
General Grewal, thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor to have you here today. I'd like to ask, what's the thing that you and your office are most proud of doing since you've essentially?
I think that there are a lot of good answers to that. I'm going to stand because I just like walking. Let me also, before I answer that, just say that Adam Shapiro is my favorite of the Shapiros. Adam's brother, Josh, is a great partner in the Attorney General of Pennsylvania and a great ally in so many of the efforts that we undertake to stand up for not just the residents of this state, but the residents of this country. Just an incredible, incredible human being and mentor to me, because he had been Attorney General for a little bit longer than I was before I came into this role. So the answer to that, I think, right now, I'm proud of how we've taken an office of 8,013 divisions and pivoted and helped that office really become, we've woken up a sleeping giant. We have a lot of tools, and we're using them to stand up for our residents, to fight the opioid epidemic, to fight gun violence, to promote police-community relations. But if I had to point to one thing, it's something we did last year, and I mentioned a little bit of it when I was talking about Rachel. I would say it was standing up and seeing how powerful our litigation tools are when we stood up for our dreamers. And I'm certain that you have a sense of who our dreamers are, but they're really young people like yourselves, maybe even younger, who came to this country, not because they wanted to come here, but they were brought here with their families, and their families brought them here. And they came here and they didn't have status in this country, but they grew up, they went to school, and then President Obama and the administration, under his administration, invited them out of the shadows and said, if you follow these rules, you can go to school, you can work, you can live your lives, you don't have to live in fear. And they came out of the shadows. And after we invited people out of the shadows and they were contributing to our society and they were going to school and they were working, all of a sudden this administration came in and said, you know what, we've got to end this program right now. We've got to go to court and stop it immediately, get an immediate injunction. And so the state of Texas sued the federal government to end this program. They sued them in Texas. Now, we had a feeling that the federal government wasn't going to really defend the lawsuit very strongly, and that they might just roll over. And so Rachel and her team intervened in that case on behalf of our state. And we flew down to Texas. You know, Rachel went down with her team of lawyers. I wanted to go down, but I didn't want anybody to think that I was going down there and I was, you know, wasting money or anything like that. So I flew down there on my own dime. And I flew down there the first flight in the morning, and I came back the last flight at night because I wanted to see her stand up for our state and our residents and the dreamers across this country. And when I sat there, I saw the lawyers from the state of Texas get up and make these arguments about why that program should end immediately. Not once did they talk about people. They didn't talk about the lives that would be impacted. They talked about technical legal arguments of jurisdiction and standing. And I was just so proud that when Rachel got up and the lawyers from New Jersey got up, they talked about the people and the lives that would be disrupted and about the impact that this court's decision would have on so many people across this country. And that just reassured to me that we were doing the right thing at it, that getting involved in these fights is worth it, that it makes a difference. And then the Friday before Labor Day, we got the decision that the court wasn't going to grant Texas's motion for an injunction, would not enjoin the program immediately. So at least for the moment, our dreamers could go about living their lives. Now that case is before the Supreme Court, but that just shows you what we can do to help people, and I think that's one of my proudest moments.
Thank you so much, General Grewal. I also wanted to ask you, perhaps, Officer Noble, you could also talk about this. What would you say the role of public opinion in law enforcement is in your office?
I'll tell you my view of public opinion, and I could say this because I'm not elected, so I don't have to worry about polls. I don't have to worry about how a certain thing will register in a certain community. I have the extraordinary luxury as a non-elected Attorney General to just make the right calls for the right reasons. That I don't have to worry about making the popular decision. I just have the luxury to just make the right decision. And that's an extraordinary luxury to have. And that's what we've been doing since day one. What's the issue? Let's look at it. What's the best decision? And I think law enforcement, I mean, they live in a world of right and wrong, and here are the facts, and here's how we should be doing things. And they don't pull things either, but I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel.
Thank you, General. The public opinion of law enforcement is an absolute priority for us, and here's why. We need the people that we serve to have confidence in us. We need the people that believe in us to truly believe in us. And when they see this uniform or any uniform, no matter where they're from, to believe that we stand for goodness, that we stand for kindness, that we stand for justice, that we're objective, that we operate free of bias. We do enforce the law, and sometimes that makes us unpopular. I get that. Every now and then, yes, there are people that might not like us, and I understand that. But as long as we have the confidence of the public that we serve, then we can do our job better. And I'll end it with this. We recognize, this command, Colonel Callahan, and working for this AG, understands that confidence is not just given to us simply because I have a badge and I wear this uniform. We have to earn it. And we have to earn it every day, in every interaction. Everything we do, every phone call I take, every interaction I have, whether it's with a peer or a member of the public or a politician or a judge, I have to earn, as does every other law enforcement officer, their confidence. And that is a sacred trust that we earn every day. So the public opinion of what we do, and I don't really care if people like me personally. I do have to understand that this job, I think the General speaks to that, sometimes we're not the most popular, but I need, and we need, the people to trust us. And that is where the public opinion comes in.
How concerned should we be about the rise of hate crimes and anti-Semitism in general, and why do you think it's happening?
I think we all should be very concerned. I think our office puts out a report. It's on our We do it with the state police. Homeland helps with the report on tracking every bias incident in the state that's reported to us. Last year, 569 reported incidents of bias and hate in New Jersey. It's the highest since 2011. It's been going up and up and up every year, and we're already beyond numbers from last year, so this year will be even higher than last year. Part of that is probably due to us being out there and asking people to report more, but a large part of it is because there's simply more hate and more of these incidents out there. So a couple of things. What we've seen is that 25% of the known offenders that we're dealing with, or actually more than that, 40+% of the known offenders are young people. And I think over a quarter of the incidents have been happening on college campuses or in schools. So I think that should be a wake-up call for all of us, whether we're educators, whether we're parents, whether we're public officials, whether we're reporters covering this issue, that this is a real issue out here in New Jersey and across the country. Why is it happening? I think the political rhetoric has something to do with it. I think some of the political rhetoric that we're seeing from elected leaders has helped take the lid off, and otherwise hate that had been on a low simmer now is boiling over, because they've not only taken the lid off, they've fanned the flames, and that's causing more of this to happen. And so it's incumbent on people like me who have a platform to push back and call out people when they engage in this type of rhetoric, whether it's national or local or school board level. The other part of it is social media. Right? You guys are on Facebook, you guys are on Instagram, you are on Twitter and Snapchat and all this stuff. That's allowed it to become a lot easier to do some of this. One of the hate that we're seeing among juveniles is somebody Snapchatting something to somebody. Oh, it's just a swastika I Snapchatted to them. We've had reports of that. It's never just a swastika. But that social media platform, that phone, makes it easier to say something to somebody that you wouldn't say to them face to face, or you wouldn't have the guts to say to somebody. So I think it's not only allowed to become easier to do this sort of hateful stuff, it's also pushed people who believe in these things closer together. You know, these folks would never have been able to find community with each other in the public square or in our schools. But what happens is that social media and Facebook and all these platforms have these algorithms that if you're searching for a certain thing or you're looking for a certain topic, it pushes you together with other people who are looking for the same things. So people who have hate in their hearts can find community in social media. And that's a horrible thing, because then their beliefs become normalized to them. And they don't see it as something that's being called out because there's other people around them proving their thoughts. And I think that has had a lot to do with what we're seeing out there. And social media companies need to be more accountable as to how their algorithms are pushing these folks together. And we're exploring every avenue that we can as to how we can get involved and hold those social media companies accountable for promoting this type of thought, these types of thoughts, and putting together folks who express these ideologies, because they do lead to criminal conduct. So those are some of the causes, some of what we're seeing in the state.
Do you believe?
Drew, do you want to add anything from Homeland Security?
No, I want to echo your comments. I think that's exactly right. I think there's, at the younger level, we need to be educating better and call it out when we see it. I think that social media plays a huge part of the ability to people anonymously to do incidents like that, just hate speech. And a lot of the gaming now has desensitized people to the actual, what actually happens when people, so you play in these shoot 'em up games and you just go about your business and you can get so many lives. Well, the reality is oh, that's not how it happens. In fact, one of the recent hate attacks, the shooter admitted he stopped just because he underestimated how much blood would be at the scene, so it upset him. And that was a direct correlation to his having gained similar acts. From the federal level, we've been tracking an increase. The FBI has recently looked at what we call the RMVE, the racially motivated violent extremism, And at the state level, there's a recognition that, as the Attorney General mentioned, is that we're seeing a trend in the wrong direction. But I think, and that's why we're out here, is to talk, to show that unity of effort, shoulder to shoulder, all the law enforcement, all the communities, that we're in this together to try to turn the trend backward, so that we actually get to that community, that empathy, the acceptance, and then hopefully that peace.
And to the young people, if you experience it, share it. Share it with your teachers, share it with your parents, share it with us, because what you might think is an isolated incident might fit with the pattern of behavior we're seeing in a particular community, and then we have other resources that we can send there. It doesn't have to be criminal, but it's, people can go into the schools. We can go into different community groups and elected officials and say we have to have a community meeting or a process by which we come together to address these issues. That's what we're doing in Lakewood right now, in Ocean County, is we're seeing an uptick in this type of behavior and anti-Semitism online. We're in the community doing a lot of listening sessions, a lot of efforts to bring different groups together to nip it in the bud and to take down these hateful Facebook groups. So they come down on their own when we bring folks together.
Do you believe it's the role of the government to step in and actually, monitor Facebook and perhaps shut down these hateful groups on Facebook themselves, instead of shut down their actual speech and prevent them from interacting with one another online?
Well, Facebook's not doing anything about it.
Right, I know.
That's a challenge here, right? Where do you cross that line from speech to conduct? And where you of course don't want to regulate free speech, but free speech is not unlimited speech, and it's not speech that incites and promotes people to commit hateful conduct. And I think the social media companies have all these great tools where they can monetize what you're doing and have a view as to what you're doing. They know everything you're doing out there, right? It's not a mistake that you went and you looked for new Air Jordans, and then the next time you're scrolling down on Facebook, you see an Air Jordan ad pop up, right? It's not like, oh my God, how did they know I was looking for Air Jordans? They know what you're doing, and so it's about time they use their tools to promote responsibility and accountability online. And I think we certainly have a role to play to hold anyone who creates and incites harmful conduct accountable. And if that's the social media companies and it brings us there to them, we won't hesitate to use our tools to force them to do more.
So could you expand on those tools? How do you propose social media companies and the government punish people for these kinds of crimes?
Well, so we certainly punish and have the ability to prosecute folks who are, crossing that line into conduct, and the social media and the evidence that we're able to gather online might lead us to an organized group, and it might lead us to efforts to uncover efforts that they're planning some type of conduct. And we've interceded in those cases. Government and law enforcement keeps track of what's going on. I mean, we have a lot of tools out there to make sure we're doing our part to identify those actors who are going to commit conduct and engage in criminal conduct based on what we've seen online. So we're doing that. And I think, the other tools we have is we have the tool of the Attorney General's office, that we could bring Facebook to the table and we could partner with our fellow AGs and say, we need to have a conversation. And we're having those conversations about finding a way to address this issue and promoting better conduct online. And so the threat always is that we have legal tools to hold them accountable civilly if we could link them to something harmful or a nuisance that's happening in our communities. And so we don't hesitate to use our legal tools when appropriate, when the facts justify it. But certainly we're starting conversations with the social media companies. Those conversations have been happening with other AGs, and that's something I'm hopeful will lead to a fix.
If I could add, I would like to say that the state of New Jersey is a leader in the red flag laws also. So if we're seeing that behavior in social media, there are steps that the AG's office can take to actually, if that person has weapons, to go in there and actually prosecute them and take those weapons off the street. I think we're one of the first states to actually to enact and actually prosecute under the red flag law. So I think that's a great tool. As the AG said, though, speech is a fundamental right in our country, so we're very careful about that. And I'm speaking more from my federal experience now. It's a balance that we have to find. The Bureau, the FBI, we were very focused on the attribution. So if there was something that was published on a social media platform, we wanted to provide the attribution so that people could go and research it themselves. But we wanted to, don't just think it's a happen chance that it showed up. No, this is being published by this hate group. So we wanted to provide that attribution. So those are some of the tools that together federally and at the state level that we employ.
And do you think that there should be harsher sentences for hate crimes, and why?
So in New Jersey, under state law, we don't have technically a hate crime. We have other crimes that if they're motivated by hate, the penalties are more. So I think certainly for deterrence, the penalties need to be more for crimes that are motivated by hate, because I think, like I said earlier, we can send a powerful message of deterrence, which means showing others through the sentences that we're seeking that this type of conduct will be dealt with harshly to deter other people from engaging this type of conduct or following these paths. So I think that's an important tool, when we're arguing cases that are motivated by hate to argue for longer sentences.
And I think at the federal level, there's an enhancement. If it is a hate crime, there's a 10-year enhancement.
That's right.
How does the state combat anti-Semitism specifically, or what actions?
So I think certainly we're having sessions like this across the state when we're talking about the issue. I think the answer, as I mentioned earlier, is to go and talk to young people. And I think one of the things that I want to explore is when there is a juvenile offense, when there's a young person who does something, because we're seeing a lot of this in our schools with respect to anti-Semitism, whether it's somebody putting a swastika on a school wall, and we identify that person. Now, young people get a lot more leeway in the criminal justice system. There's things called station house adjustments, where the police officer might come, talk to the parent, talk to the student, say, hey, don't do it again, knock it off. If you do it again, we're going to treat it much more seriously. I think that's woefully insufficient when it comes to a kid who puts a swastika on a wall. Because I think that has to be a teaching moment where we have some sort of curriculum for that young person to know how hurtful what he did was, not just to the Jewish community, but to all communities. And so that is something that we've been talking to others about, and how we can incorporate that type of educational curriculum when it comes to addressing an incident of youth bias and getting somebody into a learning program. And I know the ADL has some great programs. There have been other programs that I've heard about where it's 5 or 6 sessions at a local community college to talk about the Holocaust, to talk about other issues related to anti-Semitism and bias and hate generally. And I think that is a powerful tool to correct behavior early and not leave it unaddressed.
So what sort of different approaches do you take when looking at domestic terrorism and international terrorism here in New Jersey?
Yeah, so if it's an incident of if there's a terrorist incident in New Jersey, as there was last week, that's a whole of government response, where we work with our federal partners and our state partners, where the FBI, the ATF, the state police all come together to respond. And then if it's looking as if it was an international terrorist incident, for example, not characterizing last week's incident as such, but if we're looking at international terrorism, then that's the FBI and our federal partners who take the lead on that, because their reach is international, and their reach is broader, and their reach is across the country. If it's domestic terrorism, then it's either both of us working it together or having our federal partners take over the investigations, and we support them because they have more tools and resources. And so domestic terrorism, we prosecuted cases in New Jersey related to domestic terrorism. We've prosecuted cases where people were engaged in anti-Semitic criminal conduct motivated by anti-Semitic beliefs under our domestic terrorism statute, which we have in New Jersey, which has a 30-year mandatory minimum. if you hit certain criteria, or 20-year mandatory minimum, excuse me. And so when I was the county prosecutor in Bergen, we charged 2 individuals and we charged them with domestic terrorism. They're serving about 27 years for engaging in criminal conduct targeting the Jewish community in Bergen County. So those are tools that we have and that we use.
You mentioned mandatory minimums. How do you work with mandatory minimums and the opioid crisis? There are many people who believe it should be treated more as a disease.
Yep.
How do you work with that when you have mandatory minimums?
So that's a great question. You know, I think there are mandatory minimums when it comes to violent crimes like domestic terrorism, homicides, the killing of a law enforcement officer, other mandatory minimums that we have in this state that have a role in deterrence. But I wholeheartedly agree that we should not have mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug offenses, for nonviolent property offenses, and for a whole other category of offenses, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You can't lock up a disease in the hope that it gets better. You have to treat it as a public health crisis, and you have to treat it with treatment and diversion out of the criminal justice system, and that's something I've been pushing, not just since I've been Attorney General, but before as a county prosecutor. And recently, last summer, in June or July, I called for the end of mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug offenses, and we had a recommendation from our Criminal Sentencing Disposition Commission to our legislature recently in their report that we should get rid of them, and I think that would improve lives.
So, more on mandatory minimums and sort of this civil rights take on it. What are you looking at in terms of legalization of marijuana?
So that is something that's squarely before our legislature. They have been dealing with this, and I think where they've landed most recently is that it'll be a question on the ballot next year and a constitutional amendment. So I have not weighed in on it because I have to enforce the laws that they enact, and so we'll see what they come up with.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, my honor. My honor.
I want to give a thank you to Eva, to Ben, to Mr. Ober for all their work. Of course, a thank you to the General as well.